Okay, thanks everyone who stuck around to the end of this. Everyone just didn't disappear after the best paper talk and leave me to it. So I'm here on behalf of my co-authors, which are listed on the slide there. So that is, I can't read it because I made it too small. But that's myself, Alistair MacDonald, Joe Briggs, Jen Manuel, Emma Flynn, Karen Salt, and John Vines. And a couple of those people are in the room now. So if you have any horrible questions, please ask them. Okay, so just one more thing as well, actually, before I start. The title of my paper is having a bit of an issue in the digital library. So those of you that have already downloaded it, which I think it was 73 last time I checked, it's got the wrong title, but it's cool. The rest of it's fine. Okay, so we've already had some really, really interesting perspectives on civic technology in this session, from frameworks to city-scale engagement and focusing on how citizens use technology. And I hope to be able to add to this by discussing our study, which focuses on civil society organisations, and in particular how the design and deployment of technology can help us better understand the role of technology, the role of civil society. So the context in which I'm going to describe this study is in the UK, where austerity and a political drive towards localist governance has really transformed the role of civil society. And in discussing this study, I hope to highlight the importance of better understanding the role of civil society during civic technology deployments, and importantly, how civic technology might actually enable us to do this. So before I get into talking about our technology, I'm going to give some background and a bit of kind of context with a discussion on localism and civil society's role. And I'm going to talk a little bit about social media and democracy before talking about the design and deployment of our platform. And I'll cover a couple of findings and give some reflections. Okay, so in recent years, localism has become a significant policy discourse in many Western liberal democracies, particularly in the UK, where it's taken various forms under various governments. After many years as an ideological and political discourse, though, localism became an act of parliament in 2011, and now in the UK, local authorities are legislated to support community decision-making. We see things like neighbourhood planning, which was talked about in earlier sessions, and other community funding initiatives like participatory budgeting and things like that. But is this a democratic victory? As this image highlights from my local council in Newcastle, it could be argued that the drivers for these transformations and changes are almost certainly economic. So what does this mean for civil society? What we're seeing on the ground has been described as a parallel politics, where the ideals of localist governance are less than ideal in practice. Local government is being asked and legislated to devolve powers and responsibility to communities, but at the same time, their budgets in which to support this is being severely cut. So we know that a functioning democracy requires a vibrant and responsive civil society, but more often than not, these groups are having to fill in the gaps left by local government. So this, and among other factors, makes the role of civil society really ripe for civil technology deployments, and in what we talked about in my paper last year as a kind of civic turn, which has also been touched on by some of the speakers here. We're increasingly seeing situations where there's a collaboration between researchers and community civil society organisations, where these tools are handed over. And although much of this work in this area has been very successful in different ways, which I talk about a little bit in the paper, not many of these have focused on deliberative democracy, and those that do focus on deliberative democracy have tended to move to online platforms. So a long, long time ago in the past, social media was sort of hailed as this great hope for democracy. And in this kind of narrative, a lot of political deliberative democracy sort of things have moved to online platforms. But I just wanted to highlight what we know about social media as kind of an online platform's failings as a democratic mechanism. We know that it can polarize views and people form echo chambers where they only expose themselves to views that align with their own worldview. So we have to ask questions about social media's ability to incubate and inform citizenry. So we asked ourselves a question: is there a way of thinking about technology and democracy that overcomes the negative properties of social media? We wanted to recapture the values of critical, informed debate, and we try to think differently about technology's role in this. So, in light of all this, we designed something called Community Conversational. So this project began when I was invited by a local civil society organisation to go along and observe consultation events they were holding in a town in northeast England. The consultation was around allocating funding in the town, and as I said earlier, is very typical of these types of consultation events where decision-making powers are devolved. So at these events, groups of citizens, residents would sit round tables in groups of 5 or 6 and were asked to attach sticky notes to maps, like you can see in the image on there. So this was related to identifying assets in the town and sort of gaps in service in order so they could know, where we could allocate this funding they had. And again, this sort of map placemaking activities also very common as a kind of devolved decision-making kind of consultation activity. So at the end of each of these events, the maps would have to be cleared for the next event. So the organisers would take some photographs of the maps, and then that was that. So during this observation period, I identified some recurring themes from these events. First of all, the facilitation was unequal across tables. Some facilitators were really skilled and good at keeping conversations on track, whereas others were much less experienced. There were often just volunteers that worked for these civil society groups who were asked on the day to turn up and help facilitate. So as a result, some residents at these meetings were able to dominate the discussion, and at times, actually some kind of residents' associations would turn up at the group, spread themselves around tables, and really try and push just one issue. Also in discussions at the end of the sessions with the organisers, it became clear they were really concerned about their ability to meaningfully capture and review any discussions that had happened at the events. The nature of the events meant that often people were just making statements or not speaking at all and just writing on post-it notes. So the facilitators tried to take notes during the sessions, but this was often interrupted by their role as facilitators, breaking up arguments, trying to keep the conversation going. And they said to me, often the most interesting sort of insights they got was after the mapping event was done and people were standing around having coffee, where it was a lot more kind of conversational in tone. But then again, this couldn't be captured yet again. So the first thing we wanted to do with our design was get rid of these sticky notes. They were often intelligible to the organisers after the event, and they always lacked any real context or explanation. They were also difficult to capture for review. So we replaced these sticky notes with plastic markers, like the ones you can see in the image. These could be moved around the map, and we used a very simple visual tracking system so we could track where they were on the map. This enabled us to record the people's discussions, and we could tie that to a specific place on the map because that's where the marker was. Alongside these markers, we also designed some prompt cards. The prompt cards instructed participants to move the marker and give an opinion on specific matters of concern. And these physical components were basically designed to tangibly promote turn-taking, as well as try and deter dominance from one topic or another. The rules of the activity was really simple, although I've been told a couple of times that I'm really good at making it sound a lot more complex than it is. But basically, each participant takes it in turns to pick a prompt card, and then in response to that prompt card, they move a marker and explain to the rest of the people around the table why they've chose to put the marker there, and then it's the next person's turn. So as well as these physical components, we designed a platform software interface. The software interface is a basic data mining tool that can be used to filter down and quickly review sections of the audio recorded, transcribed conversation and video data. So it allows themes from multiple conversations to be found quickly. Software can be mined to explore, for example, when a question is asked or when a marker was moved. So then searches can be made by prompt question, geographic area, or by keyword search. And as such, overlapping data or any unusual anomalies can be identified more quickly. So we trialled this design at 2 events run by the lead civil society organisation we previously worked with, but alongside some other more local civil society groups in the particular areas. So the first event we had 30 residents, and at the second there were 50. The first consultation was around a neighbourhood plan, and the second was around the allocation of community funds. And as I said a couple of times earlier, both of these types of events are really typical of the type of consultation activity that's carried out in the name of localism. So after the events, we held a couple of evaluation workshops with all of the organisers and main civil society actors, where we demonstrated the software interface to them and held some semi-structured interviews. So all this we used together. So we had the recordings from all the tables across the events, plus the interviews with the organisers, and we used all these transcripts as a corpus, a data corpus for thematic analysis. And before I start talking about the findings, I just want to be clear at this point. The design of our system was predicated on the idea that everyday talk or informal conversation and opinion given could be considered as a significant contribution to local consultation processes. I also want to stress here the importance of deliberation during our design. And while we had a number of problems with supporting and developing methods that could promote and capture this deliberative talk, we did have some successes, which I'll talk about a couple now. So one of these successes included promoting equality within the conversations through the introduction of turn-taking. This was appreciated by the lead civil society group because they felt it opened up the conversation, and previously they felt things were quite narrowed by certain issues. The prompt cards, as I said, were designed to promote turn-taking, and we're surprised by how quickly all of the residents were to comply with the rules. And they really kind of just played the game, played along straight away. This was appreciated by the local decision-making groups in particular for making the discussion fair and give everyone a chance to have their say. So in the past, in the exact room where we held it, one of them told us, where they'd previously held just standard town hall meetings, they were able to make an easy comparison. They told us, you made everybody say something. If you just sat in a hall, like they used to, and said, what do you think about this? 2 or 3 people would take up the whole conversation. Somebody would have said nothing. The groups also found that it became a bit of a leveler for facilitation, especially in situations where they had less experienced facilitators. As I said, they told us that often they just sort of went in their office on a morning and said, who's available to facilitate, give them a little bit of briefing, and they took them along. So it was really valued by them as it provided a new form of hands-off facilitation. The method also created opportunities for the citizens to be reflective, and they were able to challenge one another and engage each other in a discussion. In addition, there was clearly a respect for and better understanding of competing claims, which is one of the expected outcomes of deliberation. So during the game, residents showed a willingness to listen to and even empathise with alternative views and take these into consideration even during their turn, which was like something very different from what we'd seen in the observations. For example, one resident these were kind of older residents on this table who maybe in their 60s and 70s, and on their turn they said, I think that's a very good point. I do think we're short of what we can call communal spaces in the village for children, and that's very important. And then another person on their turn to follow up with this also brought this up. I never realised it must be difficult to live here and have children, because it's not geared up for children, is it, the village? So although some of the groups were encouraged by the open-ended nature of the conversations that the prompt cards encouraged, the decision-making groups didn't always appreciate this kind of richness. So despite showing them our online tool, they just kept asking us for much more simple visualizations of the data. We had this kind of rich data from all these tables and all these residents, but they always just wanted it narrowed down as something they thought that would be useful as evidence. So as these quotes show here, they privilege really simple lists and statistics. And, you know, so one of them said, for example, even if it was just a bar chart that said doctors, transport, rural spaces, green spaces, whatever was important. So, and I mean, in this case, the actual things he came up with on that list were a list of the priorities that that group had already identified as being the priorities for the village. So they kind of wanted us to be able, from our richer data, to be able to pull out stats that backed up these priorities they'd already kind of identified. So just generally, the groups that we worked with were quite positive towards our process because they considered this a means of them doing consultation visible, and it looked like evidence of them taking action. And this is important for these sort of groups for many reasons, which a lot of people in this room will know very well. But the decision makers, as I said, desired data that was simple to read, easy to understand, and quantitative. And this, in part, actually was what appeared to be in relation to their biases or and privileging things they saw as being facts over the conversational data we'd captured. But this lack of engagement with the rich data is problematic because of the ways the groups were able to put their own narrative on these simple figures and to create evidence to back their own cause. This speaks to issues identified in the literature in HCI and beyond around sort of groups picking abstracted data to back up decisions that are already made. So with this, for me, comes questions around who should have access to this data. So just to sum up, because I'm aware I've only got a couple of minutes or a minute left. So deliberative democracy and these discursive processes have been shown to be very good for engagement, as well as providing some structure and facilitation that may be lacking in devolved decision-making processes. The method also created opportunities for the citizens to be reflective, to challenge one another and engage each other in discussion, creating rich data about matters of local concern. Despite the issues around decision-makers placing their own narrative on this hand-picked data, creating this rich data still has the potential to promote accountability in local decision-making processes, though. So it's like platforms like this that capture all this rich data. If we think about these as having to be presented online and in full and easily searchable and accessible to everyone, then other community organisations or residents from these communities are able to make visible when organisations are misrepresenting the people they are seeking to represent. So maybe it's not all just about handing over these technologies to these community groups. Maybe it's about handing them over in a way that they've got responsibility before, but they can also be open to other people to be able to hold them accountable as well. And that's all from me. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for your talk, Gilly Lesh at Cornell. The problem of the decision makers not being able or wanting to sift through the rich data, maybe because they are overworked. Do you have any thoughts about how to address that? I mean, maybe bar charts aren't the answer, but what is the answer for them?
Yeah, so I think in terms of a technical problem, we thought of this as well, because we were like, we've built this interface, and it makes everything really simple, but there's still a lot of work for them to do, you're quite right. So one potential answer to that is we're working on making the interface much better for them. So for example, something they can do collaboratively, where they can just simply like theme things, tag bits of the data. So then once it's done, they're not sitting there with this one big task ahead of them. But other than that, I think, it is a problem. I think as I tried to sort of highlight at the beginning of the talk, these civil society groups are often, they're self-selected volunteers, but still they're volunteers, and they've got this idea that they're doing good and all of this, but essentially they are overworked, and because in the UK especially, as I said, the government can no longer sort of support these groups and help them, and so their workload's going up and up, and so they're not just getting power here, they're getting more and more responsibility too. So I didn't really want to stand here and seem like I was criticising or anything, but what I mean is just there is kind of, these new problems can be born from this though, if they have this, because they do have power as well as responsibility. So, but yeah, I think that's a problem, is their work is a massive problem.
Hello, my name is still Connor, still from University of Washington. So, sort of building off this last question, but instead of handing this off to this rich data off to local governance, what if you were to instead hand it off to a designer, right? And how might that designer sort of sift through this rich data to arrive at some actionable design goals?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we wanted to do, because I mean, of course, as I have done it to some level, we can sit and people with skills in research or whatever, they can easily go and sort this data out and sift through it and make sense of it. But the whole point of this is about, I think, being able to hand over tools to community organisations to do it for themselves. And as such, I think the onus is on us, not when we're designing civic technology, is to try and make this process as easy as we can for them. So in this case, the actual process itself, there was no technology at all, apart from simple audio recording. And then, so we want as much as this stuff to be automated, and as much as the sense-making part, which is the hard work part, as simple as possible, but essentially that they are going to just have to do some of the work. And if they're formed as a group to write a policy for their neighbourhood, for example, they're already kind of putting their hands up and saying, we know we've got this responsibility, we know that in the end we're going to have to produce this policy. So I think it's just important that we make sure they are hearing more than their own sort of friends' voices when they're during that process.
Of course, and maybe a ramp up or a slow handoff.
Yeah.
Train.
Yeah, I think there's going to have to be more scaffolding in with this one in particular.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot.
Cheers.